All right, welcome, folks. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Dylan, for flying all the way from the West Coast for this.
Yeah,
it's well
thanks for having me.
appreciated. So I think we should start off by just making sure folks in the audience really know what Figma is. So Dylan, if you could give us a little background on that, that would be great.
Sure. Well, first off, who here has used Figma before? Anyone? OK, we got a few people. Cool. So Figma is a collaborative design tool. The backdrop is that design is becoming more important than ever before across our industry. For example, IBM in 2012, when we started Figma, IBM had 72 engineers to every one designer at the company. 5 years later, in 2017, IBM was 8 engineers to every one designer, and 3-to-1 on mobile. And so we're seeing this huge rise in design. And also, design is becoming more collaborative than ever. I think the reason for this is because if you look at the way that products are built, it's not enough not just to build something anymore. With the rise of cloud, the rise of app stores, building is becoming easier than ever. And now, if you don't have the best design product, you will not win. You're going to lose in the market. And so everyone wants to work with a designer. So Figma is a way to do that. We make it so that you have a cloud-based environment to work collaboratively with other designers, engineers, product managers, marketing people. And it's all in one, so you can do design, prototyping, handoff, all in place.
Thank you. I fear to say that I actually learned something in that introduction, so thank you, Dylan. The folks wanted me to just give some background as to why Index decided to invest in Figma in the first place. It was 6 years ago, and Dylan was even younger back then, significantly, of course. The way that it happened was I first met Dylan when you were an intern at Flipboard, working for the great Mike McHugh. And I remember Mike McHugh grabbing me and saying, Danny, you got to meet this guy. He's in for the summer from Brown, and he's been working on really cool stuff. I don't remember what it was, but I remember visually it was pretty interesting already.
Yeah, it was like a data visualization of how people use Flipboard at the time. Yeah,
cool.
I was impressed because Mike hadn't told me this was going to happen. And so from my perspective, this board member, Danny, was coming to me, and he's like, hey, man, want to show me some stuff? And oh, yeah, sure. So I was a little freaked out.
Exactly. I think it was, I already knew there was something special there, and then lost touch with you. And I was chatting with someone that Index and myself are very close to, who's Jeff Weiner, the CEO of LinkedIn. This was in 2011, and sort of telling him about our thesis that a lot of the big 10-ton gorillas who had developed this advantage through their suite of software that they've been selling for 20 years with very little incrementalism, were going to be disrupted. And so I said we were going to invest in Dropbox because of Microsoft, and Adobe. I wish someone would go after Adobe. And Jeff said, well, you got to meet this guy, this kid, he did say, who was an intern, and I'm trying to convince to join us full time, but he's insisting on launching something along those lines. So that's how the original meeting happened as soon as we met you. Maybe you could give a sort of timeline of when you started Figma and what the milestones have been, and then we're going to dig into the different stages and lessons learned from those different stages.
Sounds good. So we started Figma, we started talking about Figma in December 2011. And the thesis was, at that point, just technological. We thought, OK, there's this thing called WebGL, which is a way to use the GPU in your computer in the browser. And with that, you can get more efficiency and be able to actually take creative tools and bring them to the web. But we didn't know what we wanted to build yet. So we started talking about it, applied for the Teal Fellowship, got the Teal Fellowship. I dropped out of Brown. My co-founder graduated. We started full-time August 2012.
How'd your parents feel about you dropping out of Brown?
At first, they thought I was insane.
Yeah.
And then they met the people behind the Teal Fellowship, and they got more comforted, which was nice. That was the most helpful part of the Teal Fellowship, was making my parents not freak out. Also, the money was very good, too. It was $100K over 2 years, which was incredibly helpful. It made it so we didn't have to raise money right away.
Right.
And so then August 2012 to June 2013 was exploration. Around June 2013 is when we reconnected again. you raised a seed round from you, and then we kind of like got very close to okay what we're actually building. We didn't raise our A round until December of 2014. We were still in stealth at that point. December of 2015, a year later, we launched our closed beta. It wasn't until October 2016 that we launched our GA. We didn't charge our first
folks, did you hear how long it took to actually develop Figma?
Yeah, it took a while. And then it wasn't until summer of 2017 that we charged our first $1. The entire time Danny was like, what are you thinking? We'll get there. And then it wasn't, and then early this year, 2019, we raised our Series C round and started going more commercial in terms of like going to charge for our highest product tier orgs as well.
Right. And just a question of scale of adoption. It was always sort of a grassroots concept that you had, but can you give a sense of the scales of the organizations using it? And
so currently, I mean, we're used sort of like by people all around the world. 81% of our weekly active users are outside the United States, despite not being localized at all. And we've got everything we do from freelancers in Russia to like Microsoft and Google and Airbnb, Booking, like using Figma as well.
Right. And it scales from sort of a few people to the largest groups are thousands of people.
Exactly.
Right.
And we have to do a lot of work to figure that out.
Okay, very cool. So let's start at chapter 1, founding. How important was it to have a co-founder? Like, would this be realistic without Evan?
Yeah, there's no way I would be here without my co-founder. So my co-founder is like the most amazing person in the world. I'm very biased, of course, but he's a complete and utter genius. Way, way smarter than I am. And I'm not saying that as like a humility thing. I'm just saying that as like a fact. I'm technical. I mean, I was a CS math major at Brown. Evan ran laps around the rest of us. And also, in addition to that, he's just like the kindest, most humble person you'll ever meet. And so for me, the chance to work with someone like that was like the reason I started Figma was because I thought, wow, I could actually learn from this guy so much. And then we were like, OK, well, let's figure out what to do now. It wasn't one of those things where we knew what we were going to go build.
He was the senior teaching assistant in
That's
one
right.
of the courses.
He was my TA. Yeah.
He was your TA.
In a bunch of different classes.
Right. So you recruited your TA to join. And from then on in, it was sort of an idea that he would be CTO and you'd be CEO.
Yeah. Evan said from day one, I don't want to manage anyone. I just want to code and do technical work. And so if you're down for that, let's do this. Otherwise, we should talk.
Right. Yeah, because I just highlight that because I think it's so much harder to found a company on your own rather than really finding a co-founder that you understand what the sort of rules of engagement are, and there's mutual respect, and you can just plow forward from then on in.
Exactly. And we had a lot of history, too. We had done hackathons together. We had built a club at Brown where it was sort of like this department group where we would bring in outside speakers and stuff like that.
Right.
And so we knew each other already, but I think I've also seen a lot of companies die because co-founder stuff doesn't work too, and so it goes both ways.
Yes, agreed. Okay, so now we're going to move to the second chapter, which is, okay, so you have this great co-founder, you guys have divvied up responsibilities, you now have to hire people. So what was your philosophy about hiring? And what I was super impressed with from the get-go with you is that even though I told you you're hiring some really senior folks here who are going to bring a lot of baggage and know-how from their perspective into it, you didn't shy away from that. So talk to us about how you thought of hiring.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, you want to get a mix of skills around the table. It's really important to be able to bring people to your company that have different experiences than you do. And also, I think seniority is great. Just because I'm junior doesn't mean that I shouldn't find people that are senior out there that can help out. Now, I think the thing that I learned over time was that culture is incredibly important. And I think it's almost cliche to say that. But the hard part is defining in the early stages, what is the culture? Because you just start bringing people in, and everyone has different values. They have different places and different perspectives. And being able to get momentum around that and then figure out, OK, here's who we are as a company. Here's what we're hiring for. And here's how to actually test for that. That just takes a while. Yeah. And for us, it was definitely bumpy along the way before we got to that point. Now it's we have all this momentum. It's very clear this is Figma culture fit. This is not Figma culture fit. But to get there was super tough.
And so how did you codify and what did you codify?
So eventually, once we felt like the group of people, there was momentum around like who we were, I did a survey to everybody in the company. It was like, what are the values out there that people think we have? And so people could like write up the values, they could submit them to us, and they could kind of describe what they thought was important about working at Figma and being a Figmate, which is what we call ourselves. And from there, I kind of tried to cluster the different values and to define our own, because I thought it had to be grounds up. And we ended up clustering them in just like 3 different values. And I know that sounds like a bit trite, but one of the things I was looking for was a property of the system, was I wanted people to remember the values. Because there's so many companies I've seen, or so many interviews I've done where I've asked people, hey, what are the values of your company? And they're like, they remember 1 or 2. They don't remember all 10.
Right.
And so I think it's really important for people to remember. And so our 3 values are actually the 3 primary shapes: circle, triangle, square. So circle is foster inclusivity, which means, how do we create a warm, welcoming environment people can come into? The triangle is be bold. I think some of the things we've done at Figma that have worked the best are these long-term projects that we really have not shied away from things that are hard. The squares have fun because if we're actually, if nobody is able to come to work and enjoy themselves, like why are we all here in the first place? And what I found interesting too was that teams started to define individually their own values on top of that as well. So for example, engineering defined some really good values, some of which I might even steal for the rest of the company. 2 that I like in particular are, one is craftsmanship, which is something that I think we apply across all of Figma. We're really focused on how do we make sure that everything we do has this like high level, high standard. Other one is lift your team. It's about giving feedback and making sure that everyone else on the team is like performing to their best abilities and really helping them get there.
Right. I mean, look, obviously the benefit of this is that I know that there have been a lot of challenges as well as successes, right? Yep. So when you say this, it sounds like it was, once we codified it, then the world was ours and it was really easy.
Yeah.
And leadership came easy. But it doesn't, right? In the sense that it's challenging at many different levels. So can you give us some insight on that? What I think, look, Dylan's done a remarkable job at growing as a CEO from the first time and from having from the get-go all these different types of people in the organization. But you did have to lead and learn how to lead on the job.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that went wrong. I mean, we only have 14 minutes left, so I can't talk about all of them. But so I mean, one of the biggest ones is like, I was an intern before I was CEO of Figma. And I didn't know the difference even between like leadership and management, which turns out leadership and management are very different things. Even if you know how to lead people, you don't necessarily know how to manage them and how to make sure that they're successful at your company and getting the feedback they need to succeed. And so to me, I think the first thing I tell people that start a company is just like, if they haven't had management experience before, to be self-aware and to make sure they know what they're getting into. I think one of the things that was just like super obvious that if you're a manager, you're going to go, oh my God, you didn't even know that, was I just didn't know how to empower people properly. We had this really high bar for people we'd bring in. And I'd bring them in, and I was like telling them what to do and micromanaging too much and not giving them enough rope to, really go explore. Yeah. And I think if you're able to really empower your employees, you do get better results. But if you don't, you'll also get mutinies. And I definitely had that at some point where just the company was like, dude, you need to like hire people and bring in people that are going to help you learn how to manage. Yeah. And actually, our first manager we hired was a great mentor to me. And I think that's like something people don't know is that you can actually bring in your mentors and have them report to you. I consider everyone on my executive team to be someone that I can learn from. And actually, furthermore, I honestly think that everyone at Figma I can learn from. We all bring different skills and experiences to the table.
Yeah. So you said something which I think a lot of entrepreneurs don't necessarily talk about is sort of like there were mutinies. I mean, there was one distinct one that I remember where it was almost like the team was saying, hey, look, we love working here, but these things better change, otherwise...
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was like, I was going through some pretty hard times myself. My dad was dying, and it was just a really rough time. Yeah. But I also was not scaling as a manager at that point. There was, I think I had 12 direct reports. I was like a year and a half into managing people, and was just feeling very overwhelmed. Yeah. And we worked through it. The team was like, I kind of like came back to the team and said, hey, let's figure this out together. And they were very receptive to that, and we were able to figure out how to get more managers in. I grew over time, but without the trust of the team and without working together with them, that wouldn't have happened.
Do you think that point actually had a really significant impact to the culture as well of Figma? Like,
it was definitely culturally defining about, you know, and also there were people that left. They didn't, some people weren't happy, and they did leave, and that was also culturally defining. And it's always hard when people leave, but my experience over time is that usually it's better for them and better for the company as well, and you get through it together. And some of the people I'm still in touch with, and there's still people that come to our holiday parties and spend time with us. So
yeah, I think that also from an investor board member hat, it was amazing to see your humility on accepting it. You know, a lot of founders would say, well, if you don't like the way that I am, you're welcome to take the door. And that's what a lot of folks would have done. But you actually internalized it and said, I actually have to change myself. And as you said, it wasn't the easiest time. You know, you had a lot of personal pressure, and you also had folks like me on the board. Actually, there weren't many others. Also pushing you hard and pushing the team hard, like, guys, I know it was going to take a long time to come out with product. I know we're taking on Adobe and Sketch, and those are very mature products, but are we going to ship?
Yeah, absolutely. That was like a big existential thing, too, is on top of everything I was just mentioning, you know, the team, if you don't ship for a long time, we had good reasons not to, but people will get demoralized, and you'll actually go slower. And so it's almost like a sort of Xenu's paradox thing where, you know, the arrow is getting closer and closer to the end, but it never quite gets there. And what happened was we said, okay, finally, okay, we're going to ship on this date, whatever happens, and we finally got out the door. And just the fact that we got out the door and people saw it, you know, it's not everybody loved it. We had, I think, two of the reactions I loved when we first launched. One was someone on Designer News, which is like Hacker News for designers, said, if this is the future of design, I'm changing careers. Another person said, a camel is a horse designed by committee, referring to our multiplayer collaboration feature. So it was very like binary that some people loved it, some people thought it was like literally the death of design.
And what have those folks done since?
I don't track them, but I mean, I think the industry's come along to the fact that like there's a better way and a better process to work. But the fact that we got any reaction at all alleviated that fear of like, what if no one cares, which is the worst outcome. And that, I think, also was something that was medicine for the team.
But the reception was pretty impressive from the get-go. Like, people did understand what you were doing, that it was collaborative, that you were creating this design system. I mean, that wasn't manufactured, actually. It's almost like there was this pent-up demand for what you were doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the rest of the world, I mean, I grew up with Google Docs. And once you use software that's actually collaborative in the web, and everything's a single source of truth with a link, why would you ever go back? I just think like the world of single player offline tools is over. And you know, we've known that, I mean, between the cloud and browser-based applications, like that's the future for a long time. It's just that some companies have had a long time to catch up, creative ones in particular, because it's the graphical demands on the system are so intense. But with WebGL, we can actually do that for the first time. So
two things that were also important I'd love your take on. We haven't really talked about it. One was, I remember that you guys had come up with a pretty interesting strategy on influencers and how to get them early on to look at what Figma was. I'm actually, in retrospect, was that valuable? That's one. And then the second one was really getting organizations to rely on them. And we went for very sort of high brand-worthy companies who had a very high bar for design and actually had their own competing internal tools. So how, in retrospect, were those worth the effort that you put into them?
I think it's always hard to answer like parallel world questions where you don't know. Like possibly there's a parallel world where you know that was a better strategy not to do those things, but I can talk about those strategies and detail them more. I think for the influencer part, really this was just talking to people. It's not super complicated. The hard part is identifying who is influential in the design community in the first place. And so for that, we actually just scraped publicly available data on Twitter to figure out like who our community is. And then of those people, I looked at their profiles and with their work, found a subset that I was really interested in, personally, and I went and talked to them and got their feedback. And over time, as the tool shipped, and they were able to see, okay, Dylan responded to my feedback, they actually went and implemented my ideas, that helped us gain trust.
Yeah.
And also, selfishly, it was just really fun to go talk to your heroes. I highly recommend it. And then on the side of your other point around just sort of like high brand organizations,
Right.
yeah, I mean, honestly, I think our strategy was just like to get everyone using Figma.
Right.
But yeah, we did try really hard to get customers like Airbnb.
Right.
And we made sure that we really listened to their demands, because if you can solve their use case,
Right.
lots of other people will also be helped too.
Right, right. And so in retrospect, that was really important, right? Because they were challenging the quality of what you were doing.
Yep.
And also, you knew that if you won them over, there would be a rippling effect for a number of other companies.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting though, because we had, I mean, a lot of challenges too in terms of even when we had like Microsoft starting to use us, it wasn't spreading very fast yet. And at some point I talked to them and the people that were our biggest evangelists there and said, hey, like, what can we do? And getting back to sort of the stages part that you said before, the response I got was, you should charge for the product. And I thought at the time that because we're free, we would be getting better distribution. And it turns out that people don't actually think you're legit if you're free.
Right.
And so paradoxically, our biggest customers, or our potential biggest customers, weren't actually adopting it because they didn't take us seriously,
Right.
because we were not charging them.
Right.
And it was actually harming our ability to spread
Right.
within these organizations.
And it is sort of ironic because Microsoft is not exactly known to encourage the ecosystem of new startups. So
I think they're kind of different now than they were
it's true.
10 years ago.
True.
But
I still have
you're
time
around
to
then, I
react.
wasn't. But I think they definitely come about face a bit.
So speaking of commercialization, I do remember a lunch that we had, which was sort of like trying to get you to, maybe I overdid it. Do you want to talk about that at Commercialization?
This is after the context is that this is after a board meeting. We weren't charging yet, and Danny was a little worried. And so Danny and one of our other board members, John Lilly, took me and Evan to lunch. And it was kind of like a pound on the table, commercialization lunch. I think Danny stopped short of getting up over the table and shaking me, but it was just barely, and it definitely left an impression. So
I paid for the lunch.
You did pay for the lunch. Thank you. It was a good lunch. But yeah, it was like I think at the time we were just really needed a jolt to the system,
Right.
to go change our. We've been so focused on building the product, getting to product market fit, that we hadn't looked up yet and gone, okay, we have it. We should charge and get to the point where we build a good business as well.
And how difficult was that for you? Like to make that, obviously I felt like I needed to wake you up to the fact, but then when you accepted it, how difficult was to migrate your focus from what had been so much on recruiting talent to build the best product to all of a sudden having to shift that?
I mean, it took us 3 to 6 months to really adapt. But then I think one thing that's beautiful about entrepreneurship is that the profit incentive is so strong. So once you start getting dollars in, you're just like, wow, that feels good. How do we do more of that? And so it happens really fast, and you have this flywheel that starts to occur.
Right.
And you want to basically be able to repeat the past successes, identify, and then repeat them. So I think it wasn't that hard once we got started. It was just the sort of inertia that that lunch was helpful with, actually,
right.
in retrospect. Although at the time it was like, man, Danny's kind of angry. It's weird.
Yeah. I'm not anymore.
Yeah, that's good.
So speaking of which, so now you have a different challenge, which is, okay, products out there, lot of users, lot of weekly actives, big team, big fundraise. Now you have to scale the team.
Yep.
So talk about that and talk about what it means in terms of how you organize your time and what you get excited about and what you get worried about.
I mean, it means getting the best leaders you can possibly find for the company. One of the things I feel really honored about, again, is to get that great leadership team around the table and find people that have seen scale before, that are brilliant and that you can learn from and that other people will be inspired by and want to join your company. And if you can do that and accomplish that, and they can then get even great leaders themselves, you have this recursive effect where you're able to build for scale. And I think also just keeping the customer centricity is so important. As you scale, it's so easy for one person to try to optimize and kind of like break an implicit value. The values we talked about were things that weren't implicit, but things that are implicit for us are things like quality, things like integrity, respect, or transparency, customer centricity. And so we need to make sure that as we scale, you're always checking those things. And if people aren't being customer centric, if they're not acting with integrity, like that's an immediate like, hey, we got to talk, because otherwise those behaviors propagate and your culture gets changed and destroyed.
Do you ever? I mean, so Figma's on a really good trajectory right now, and I even we think big. Even from our standards, it's actually the adoption has grown faster than we expected. And you have like this incredibly experienced team, and you have all these folks who are really keen on joining Figma. Do you ever have these moments of, man, this is, I know that Jobs has done this and Gates has done this, and there are some folks who have done this, but not many. Like, how do you feel? What do you do in those moments where you look up in the reality and this team has so much more experience than you, but they're looking to you to lead? How do you handle that?
I think you just have to be thankful and connect with people as an individual. I mean, the reality is that I'm not Jobs, I'm not Gates, I don't want to be. I think that if we're able to stay humble and just really focus on our customers and make sure that we're able to build a great company, that's what will set us apart for the long term. That's what will make it so that we can truly scale and get to the outcome we want.
Are there mentors, or would you recommend that, like as an outlet
absolutely.
or as a?
Yeah. So we have, like for me, Jeff, for example, is a great mentor. One of the things he talks about all the time is just like, make sure that you focus on the vision. For us, the vision is make design accessible to everyone. And if we can accomplish that, then that's sort of the goal in itself. Cool. But I think we're at time. Thank you, Danny.
Oh yeah, we're at time. I was having a blast. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Dylan.
Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, folks.
Awesome.
Thank you, man.